Hello, I'm Tom Kimmel. Director Cote, thank you for the fifth time, I say again the fifth time, for that effusive, inflated, hyperbolic introduction that I provided for you. Stay with me, folks, and I promise you some facts you have never heard before, some free stuff, and hopefully some fun along the way. After all, it's my job to talk today, your job to listen. Should you finish before I do, then God bless you. The Pearl Harbor story boils down to almost everyone in Washington, D.C. versus the Hawaiian Command. Kimmel in short, the Hawaiian commanders. The important exception is Captain Lawrence Safford, the head of Naval Communications Intelligence in Washington, D.C., who dared to tell the truth, and without whom there is no Pearl Harbor story as we know it today. Notwithstanding the preceding, the Pearl Harbor story today still boils down to Washington, D.C. versus Kimmel in short.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me your attention today. My name is Manning Kimmel. I'm the grandson of the late Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked on December 7, 1941. You and I met years ago on one of your campaign stops here in Rockville, South Carolina. Mr. President, our nation is both admired and envied for the value we place on human justice. But sometimes an injustice is permitted to stand. And today I'm asking that you right one such grievous wrong. During this, the 65th anniversary year of Pearl Harbor, I'm urging you to honor a request made by the U.S. Congress. The request to restore posthumously the ranks of Admiral Kimmel and General Walter Short, the only flag and general officers barred from holding in retirement their highest held grades in World War II. Mr. President, through your leadership, you have demonstrated you value honor and human freedom above politics. And for certain, this issue is beyond politics. On May 25, 1999, Republicans and Democrats came together in the United States Senate in a bipartisan vote to restore the ranks of Kimmel and Short. The following year, both houses of Congress voted unanimously as part of the Armed Forces Spending Authorization Act of 2001 to fully restore their ranks and honor. Since 1941, there have been 10 inquiries, hearings, and investigations. 5 of these resulted in no evidential findings, no blame ascribed to either commander. Only the Roberts Commission in 1941 made a specific charge which was later repealed by both the Navy and Army boards, and again in 1946 by a joint congressional committee. None of these found the Pearl Harbor commanders guilty of anything. In fact, Kimmel was totally exonerated. And as more intelligence came to light, a number of credible historians came to the defense of the commanders. As a result, Senator Strom Thurmond, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, convened a hearing in 1995 in Washington, which resulted in the 10th investigation, known as the Doyle Report. That report held that the Pearl Harbor commanders should not have been held solely responsible for the success of the attack. However, subsequent appeals to the Department of Defense were rejected on the basis that no new information had emerged justifying the Kimmel family's request for posthumous restoration of rank. But there is new information significant to this case. In 2003, Michael Gannon, University of Florida professor of history and renowned author of historical works, appeared at the National Press Club in Washington to make public his findings. First, Admiral Kimmel has been criticized for failing to utilize long-range air reconnaissance patrols over the more dangerous sectors of the Pacific Ocean. Professor Gannon's extensive research in government archives disclosed there were no specific sectors of the ocean that had been specified as more dangerous, and that Kimmel had only 49 of 250 planes needed for a 360-degree search. Instead of throwing his patrol force away on a token search, Kimmel saved his aircraft for offensive actions specified in the Navy Pacific War Plan. As Vice Admiral William F. Halsey said, any admiral worth his stars would have made the same choice. Second, despite repeated pleas by Admiral Kimmel for any information relevant to shallow water torpedo technology, he was told there was none. Not true. Gannon found documentation showing the U.S. Navy Department 5 months prior to the attack had received in writing confirmation that the British had developed shallow water torpedoes. Tragically, this was never conveyed to Kimmel. Third, the claim that Kimmel's Navy was in a peacetime in Hawaii mentality with sailors on liberty. In fact, Professor Gannon's research of government archives shows 95% of enlisted personnel were on board all ships, as well as 5 of the 8 commanding officers. The ships were beehives of activity. Officers and sailors were performing their watchkeeping, gunnery, and engineering duties. In fact, Admiral Nimitz later maintained the same state of readiness that Kimmel had in place on December 7th, and he reissued without change Kimmel's Pacific Fleet confidential letter on port security. These new findings, along with the totality of documented evidence, propelled Congress to confirm the need for justice. Justice for 2 fine officers who were willing to fight and die for their country. And in 1999, Senators Bill Roth and Joe Biden reached across the aisle to champion a joint appeal for that justice. And they made their case clear. I quote, "Kimmel and Short were among the most accomplished officers to serve in our nation's armed forces. They remain unjustly stigmatized by our nation's failure to treat them in the same manner we treated their peers. The message is about justice, equity, and honor. Its purpose is to redress an historic wrong, to ensure that these 2 officers are treated fairly and with the dignity and honor they deserve." They go on to state that the intelligence made available to the Hawaiian commanders was not sufficient to justify a higher level of vigilance than was maintained prior to the attacks. Both commanders have been assured by their superiors in Washington that they were being provided all available intelligence. Neither had any idea that essential strategic and tactical intelligence was being withheld for telling the time and place of the attack. Mr. President, the Kimmel family understands this is a time of war. Our request does not rank high in the hierarchy of critical issues confronting our nation, but in the interest of the principles of honor and justice that define the very spirit of America, we ask that you grant this request now. Please nominate Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short to the highest held ranks of World War II. Thank you.
That was my cousin Manning. He can say in 6 minutes, which it takes me about 6 hours to say. So we proceed. Today, or this class number 5, we'll explore how was it possible for a Pearl Harbor to occur. A little background from none other than Alexander Hamilton from the Federalist Papers. The executive tends to conceal faults and destroy responsibility. It often becomes impossible amidst mutual accusations to determine on whom the blame or the punishment ought really to fall. Who is there that will either take the trouble or incur the odium of a strict scrutiny into the secret springs of the transaction? If there happen to be collusion between the parties concerned, how easy it is to clothe the circumstances with so much ambiguity as to render it uncertain what was the precise conduct of any of these parties. The Joint Congressional Committee asked one paramount question: why, with some of the finest intelligence available in our history, was it possible for a Pearl Harbor to occur? Here are some answers. Admiral Kimmel had been given no information which would justify interrupting a very urgent training program. This comes from Admiral Kimmel's successor, the famous Admiral Nimitz of World War II. In order to understand the answer to the question of the Joint Congressional Committee, it's important to have some understanding of magic. Here's the definition of magic. It was a code word for the secret American decoding of Japanese diplomatic and spy communications. Magic provided prior to the Pearl Harbor attack indications of the time, place, reason, and deceit plan to cover the attack. Hawaii, meaning Admiral Kimmel and General Short, had no magic. Washington, however, Manila, meaning General MacArthur, and Admiral Hart, the Commander-in-Chief of the Asiatic Fleet, and the British had this vital information from magic. Admiral Kimmel's predecessor as Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral J.O. Richardson, had this possible answer to the Joint Congressional Committee's question. The subordinates in a military organization cannot stand with their arm raised in protective alertness forever. Try that, folks. Some superior has to ring a bell that moves the subordinate to the center of the ring. That bell was never rung by Kimmel's superiors in Washington, D.C. Indeed, there were only 2 alerts sent to Hawaii. This one on June 17, 1940, and the one that arrived after the attack. It's perfectly obvious that if Washington, D.C. wanted to send a proper alert, they could do so, as they did in 1940, a year and a half prior to the Pearl Harbor attack. This language is language worthy of an alert. Immediately alert complete defensive organization to deal with possible trans-Pacific raid. That same language certainly could have been sent to Admiral Kimmel and General Short prior to the Pearl Harbor attack, but it was not sent. And the story gets worse. The 2 alerts that were sent by the Army, General MacArthur. There was no alert ever sent by the United States Navy, by the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Stark. None.
The Pearl Harbor Investigating Committee hears the testimony of Admiral Kimmel, who was Navy head at Pearl Harbor at the time of the Jap sneak attack, has this to say.
Another course of action then remained. That was to issue an order which would have directed dispositions of the fleet to guard against attack in Hawaii. The message of June 17, 1940. Be on the alert against hostile overseas raid for such an order. It would have had the same effect in December of 1941 as it had in June of 1940.
Admiral Kimmel's predecessor, Admiral Richardson, after the June 1940 alert, actually wrote a letter to Admiral Stark, in effect asking Admiral Stark, why didn't you send me the alert? Why did I have to learn about this from the Army? If a similar situation arises again, a remedy would be to ensure that where possible, joint action is involved, the commanders of the Army and Navy be jointly informed. But Admiral Richardson lamented. But on December 7, 1941, when an alerting message was sent to Hawaii by the Army, the Chief of Naval Operations still did not follow this sound principle. Only one dispatch was sent, and that by the Army. The Army Pearl Harbor Board hit the nail on the head when they wrote, where information has a vital bearing upon actions to be taken by field commanders and this information cannot be disclosed to the field commanders, it is incumbent upon the War Department then to assume the responsibility for specific directions to the theater commanders. This is an exception to the admirable policy of complete responsibility upon the field commanders. Short and Kimmel got neither form of assistance from the War Department in Washington, D.C. The War Department had the information. All they had to do was either to give it to Short or Kimmel or give them directions based upon it. Vice Admiral Bellinger, who was in charge of the Navy's patrol planes on December 7, 1941 in Hawaii, later had this to say in possible answer to the Joint Congressional Committee's question. The Pearl Harbor attack was a deep-dyed, deliberate plan to get this country into war with Japan and Germany by needling the Japanese into making the first war move. President Roosevelt and his cohorts criminally failed to keep Admiral Kimmel informed of information that was available, information that the simplest mind would have known was of vital importance to the protection of the Pacific Fleet. Answer number 4, how was it possible for Pearl Harbor to occur, was answered by historian Edward Miller in 2007. The U.S. forced Japan into bankruptcy to deter its aggression. July 1941, President Roosevelt froze the money to bring Japan to its senses, not its knees. But FDR's intentions were thwarted by bureaucrats determined to deny Japan the dollars needed for survival. The deprivations facing the Japanese people as a result buttressed Japan's choice of war at Pearl Harbor. Captain Russell Grenfell of the Royal Navy, he offered a possible answer. No reasonably informed person can now believe that Japan made a surprise attack on the United States. The attack was not only fully expected, but it was actually desired. It is beyond doubt that President Roosevelt wanted to get his country into the war. Japan was meant by the American president to attack the United States. Sir Winston Churchill, writing even before the Pearl Harbor attack, offered this: there are many kinds of maneuvers in war, some only of which take place on the battlefield. The maneuver which brings an ally into the field is as serviceable as that which wins a great battle. And surely Churchill and Stalin were able to maneuver the United States onto the battlefield. Answer 7. Although President Roosevelt's July 1941 executive order establishing the Coordinator of Information plainly stated that William J. Donovan, the Coordinator of Information, was to receive all intelligence having a bearing on national security, but he was in fact excluded from MAGIC at the insistence of the man who controlled its distribution, General Marshall. An exclusion that constitutes one of the most mysterious and troublesome episodes of the Pearl Harbor maelstrom. The director of the FBI was also denied MAGIC. In an internal routing slip, the director of the FBI, in his own hand, in his own cursive, wrote, "The failure of the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Military Intelligence Division to advise us, the FBI, of these MAGIC messages should be kept in mind. It was definitely a violation of the delimitation agreement." The FBI did not realize they were being excluded from MAGIC until after the war in 1946. Tokyo had ordered its spies in Hawaii and nowhere else to perform very specific espionage activities. In Hawaii and nowhere else, particularly when Hawaiian spies were ordered to report even when there were no ship movements. This can have no other usefulness from a military standpoint than for attack. The writer of the Joint Congressional Committee report was FBI agent Morgan, Edward P. Morgan. In the report, he offered that the FBI was charged with combating espionage, sabotage, and un-American activities within the United States, On June 15, 1941, Tokyo dispatched to Washington a detailed report, and here is the report. It gave information that the FBI needed, vital information that the FBI needed and did not get. And the FBI clearly was not happy about it. Answer 9 of 10. This comes from the famous Captain Taussig of Pearl Harbor fame. When he was an ensign, he was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions on the USS Nevada, a battleship at Pearl Harbor that was hit and sinking. The commanding officer was not available. Ensign Taussig took control of the ship and managed to get it out of the channel so that it wouldn't block exit for the other ships. Captain Taussig explained the deficiencies of radar for which Kimmel and Short were so frequently blamed. I do not think it strange that the so-called radar warning was ignored, for as Sir Winston might have put it, it had much to be ignored about. On 7 December 1941, this experimental equipment was extremely unreliable, mostly because it was, so to speak, false return prone. A flight of gulls, for example, could snafu the entire system, and anyone purporting to see a flight of bombers on an A-scope around December 1941 was indeed a seer of great perception. One aircraft made the same mess on the scope as 100, and any number of boats, ships, and seagulls could do the same. Captain Taussig was also outspoken about the deficiency of Pearl Harbor guns in 1941. It wasn't for a couple of years into the war that our Navy guns became capable of shooting down Japanese aircraft. In sum and substance, the fleet actually lacked an anti-aircraft protection worthy of the name. It is, in fact, remarkable that any Japanese aircraft were actually shot down by these batteries. This was not the fault of the crews. They were drilled incessantly and performed perfectly. It was purely a matter of equipment. The weaponry intended to defend against air attack was incapable of meeting the threat posed by the Japanese. The director of the FBI thought he had the answer as to how it was possible for a Pearl Harbor to occur, and he thought he had the answer 4 days after the attack, when this man, John Terbush Bissell, reported to FBI agent George C. Burton in the strictest of confidence and with a statement that it never got out that he had disclosed this information, he would be fired. That about 10 days before the attack, Japanese intercepts were broken in Washington, D.C. These messages contained substantially the complete plans for the attack. They also contained a code word. A message was sent by Army radio to Hawaii, setting forth this entire plan for the information of authorities in Hawaii. On Friday, December 5th, 1941, the code words were intercepted, which indicated that the attack was to be either on Saturday or Sunday, and this information was sent to Hawaii. Folks, if this report information had been confirmed, Admiral Kimmel should not only have been blamed for the success of the Pearl Harbor attack and court-martialed, he should have been shot. So what happened to this information? Well, J. Edgar Hoover knew how important the information was and immediately sent it to the Roberts Commission. And he sent it to the Roberts Commission via a memo. As part of the memo, this is 5 days after the Pearl Harbor attack, not only did he send it to Justice Roberts, but he sent it to the President of the United States. He sent it to the President of the United States 5 days after the attack and 8 days after the attack to Justice Roberts. He actually sent 2 memos to Justice Roberts. On one of the memos, he included instructions on how Justice Roberts should investigate. This is the actual paragraph from the memorandum that Mr. Hoover sent. Investigative suggestions for Chairman Roberts. So here's the director of the FBI suggesting to a former prosecutor and associate justice of the Supreme Court how to investigate this very hot John Terbush Bissell information. In a more readable form, this is what Director Hoover suggested to Justice Roberts. Inquiry should be made as to the date those messages were received at Washington, the date of their transmittal to Hawaii, the details of the interception of the coded words, the identity of the officer charged with handling this information at Hawaii, and what action or consideration, if any, was given to this intelligence. So what did Justice Roberts do? Well, Justice Roberts identified the officer charged with handling this information in Hawaii. And that's the only one of the 5 suggestions that Justice Roberts followed. He got a hold of the head of Army intelligence in Hawaii, Colonel Fiedler. And he asked him about this so-called warning that he got from Washington. And Fiedler didn't have any idea what Roberts was talking about, and so told him. So Roberts looked up Fiedler's assistant. Since Fiedler claimed he didn't know anything about any of this, that Terbush Bissell supposedly conducted a warning. So Justice Roberts went after Lieutenant Colonel Bicknell, who was the assistant Army intelligence officer in Hawaii, and asked him what he knew about it, what he knew about having certain code signal words that were sent to Hawaii to signal the attack on the islands. Bicknell didn't have any idea what Roberts was talking about either. Do you know of any such story? I never heard of such a thing. No, sir. As a consequence, Roberts stopped his investigation of the Bissell information and never did ask Admiral Kimmel a thing about it, nor General Short. As Admiral Kimmel explained, although Kimmel never learned of the Bissell information and the FBI memos. Nor did Chief of Naval Operations William Stanley, who served as a member of the Roberts Commission and who later styled Roberts' performance as chairman of the Roberts Commission as crooked as a snake. It is very unclear whether any of the other Roberts Commission members were ever shown the FBI memorandum. If they were, they never mentioned it. None of them did. Senator Ferguson later put Justice Roberts on the stand, put him under oath and questioned him, and wanted to know what in the world he was talking about when he was trying to interrogate Fiedler and Bicknell in Hawaii about this secret information and this supposed alert. And Justice Roberts' response was he couldn't remember. He denied that he knew Mr. Hoover was his source of information. He denied for a second time, under questioning from Senator Ferguson at the Joint Congressional Committee, he denied that he knew that the FBI was his source of information. Indeed, he denied on a third occasion that he knew J. Edgar Hoover was the source of his information. He denied knowing where he got the information. 3 times. Senator Ferguson, who of course didn't have access to the memo and didn't know how red hot the source information was, asked Justice Roberts, do you know whether there is any evidence that we do not have, that the Joint Congressional Committee does not have? And Justice Roberts, Associate Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court, under oath replied, I know there is none you do not have. Well, wait a minute, Justice Roberts. Certainly, the Joint Congressional Committee did not have the FBI's memo, did not have the paraphrased version that the FBI sent to the President 5 days after the attack, or either one of the memos that the FBI sent to Justice Roberts 8 and 9 days after the attack. Perhaps I should sum it up this way. The former director of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Admiral Tom Brooks, had this to say. General Marshall, Admiral Stark, Secretary of War Stimson, Secretary of the Navy Knox, Secretary of State Cordell Hull, among others, committed perjury, suborned perjury, destroyed evidence, and intimidated witnesses. For this reason alone, a compelling case can be made to restore Kimmel and Short to their pre-war ranks. Well, I might offer, among others, would certainly include Justice Roberts, and, for good measure, the director of the FBI. He could have spoken up as well, but he did not. Okay, I'm ready for your questions. And in the next hour, we'll talk about advanced knowledge indications. Okay, let's go.